What's up, everybody? We are going to look at and react to one of the most requested videos over the weekend. Nate Eaton interviewed one of the Lori Vallow Daybell jurors, and it's perfect timing, genius timing by Nate Eaton and East Idaho News, who have been the #1 stop for all coverage basically on the Vallow and Daybell cases, because we're going to hear from a juror who voted guilty for Lori Vallow, apply what we learned there to the Chad Daybell trial that's happening right now. I haven't listened to this full interview, so we're going to watch it for the full time together. You're going to get my initial, instant, immediate gut reactions, and I want to see what you guys have to say about it as well in the comment section. Questions that you have, we'll try to get through all of it today in this video. Hopefully I'll be in the chat. It might be late at night when we play this, but let's jump into it. So one thing to bring into this interview is some perspective, because one of the other jurors that Nate Eaton did an interview with, much closer to the Lori Vallow trial, was brought up by Lori Vallow's attorneys as an appellate issue that eventually didn't end up being anything. But I'm wondering, and I'm interested in if he will be any more, not that he wasn't careful enough. I was going to say if he was going to be any more careful, but if there will be any parameters or guardrails put up in this interview, because they don't want something to come out to potentially create an appellate issue for Lori Vallow or Chad Daybell, some extraneous circumstance where something went wrong and we need to rehear an appeal on that issue or anything of that sort. So I am going to keep an eye and ear out for that. Just knowing what happened last time, we got a lot of information. This seemed like an A+ jury who came in there not knowing a lot about the case and focused on this case alone and really did their due diligence and didn't convict her too soon. So we'll see if that plays through and if that's consistent with juror number 4 as well. Here we go.
All right, so we're here with juror number 4 from Lori Vallow's trial, Laura, and beautiful home here in Ada County. What are your thoughts so far on the Chad Daybell trial versus a year ago when we had a verdict on Lori and you were home and it was all over?
Well, yesterday I was really upset. Yesterday was a really hard day. Lots of tears.
When they came out and said that there's a mistake in the indictment?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was almost.
So we all know about that, and we have talked about it. I'm going to play this after a Daybell live, so I wonder if we'll talk about it more then. But everybody was freaking out. I had people calling me from the courthouse literally saying, we just need to talk to a lawyer. You know, some content creators that I've talked to in the past, some people that were friends with the victims and talking to the victims in the case. And they were like, what do you think is going to happen? And I was like, listen, this is not legal advice. I don't know what's going to happen. I'll just tell you, when it's happened in our cases, which you guys already know if you listen to my short, I said, if it's happened in our cases, the judge usually lets the prosecutor reopen the case, unless, of course, that date is a major focus of the defense and the defense was proving the defendant wasn't there on that date or the victim wasn't there on that date or something like that. Wasn't the case here. And as far as prejudice goes, Pryor didn't even bring it up. The judge brought it up. And that's what they were telling me. I hadn't seen it, so I was getting all the details from the people that were there. And when they told me Pryor didn't even bring it up, I was like, listen, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up or have them crushed later. So, you know, don't say this is like a guarantee, but she's at the end of the conversation, she's like, so do you think they're going to throw it out? I was like, no, I would be shocked if they threw it out. I think they're going to let them reopen and fix the issue, which is what ended up happening, which is good because you don't want a case to go away on something stupid like that. It's not a due process issue. It really didn't prejudice the defendant at all. And you know, if it did, I'd be standing up, pounding the table saying, this needs to change, something needs to happen. But that's not what this was as a Scrivener's error. It is frustrating if you focus your case a lot on the dates. I just don't think John Pryor did in this situation.
At first, like, how could you even take this in? And then how does that even happen? And
Right.
that was the first time where I actually felt mad at the prosecution for letting that happen. And I was mad on behalf of Kay and Larry for the most part, you know. And we got up and walked out, and we were all, I mean, you were there. It's like kind of like our heads were spinning, and we thought that Larry had left, but he had just gone downstairs and outside, but he was the first one out. He was gone. And I went out there and he gave me like a big hug and was like, it's going to be all right. It's in the Lord's hands. This is going to be okay. And I was like, why are you always comforting me?
Yeah.
He's just so genuine. And yeah. So, but compared to last year, my head was.
So a lot of people, I guess, were angry at the prosecution, which I can understand. There's a lot going on, right? A lot going on. No excuse for that. But people were legitimately angry at the prosecution. So they fought, they researched, and they got it fixed. It sucks. You don't want to put people through that pressure and through that stress. But as trial lawyers, they did what they had to do at the end moment to get the dates changed. Some people will like that. Some people won't. But a lot of stuff happens in a trial, and you as a trial lawyer have to be ready to adapt. And it's the hardest lawyer specialty, no doubt. That's my opinion. but it is the most stressful and hardest situation. So much going on at the same time, so much to remember procedurally and factually.
Like so foggy at the end of it. And I couldn't do simple tasks or like make simple plans or want to be around anybody at all. There was I don't know how many weeks after the trial ended, but Tom Evans that you've interviewed before, he invited us over. And so my kids and I went over to his house, and I felt so much anxiety being around people and being around people I didn't know. And I don't know what the psychology is behind that, but I'm sure it's just trauma related.
Yeah.
So,
and he's one of the few people, one of the 17 other people that can relate to exactly, well, not exactly, but almost exactly what you're going through.
Yeah.
So a couple things. She seems very friendly. Like her and at least some of the jurors are still friends. They still hang out. They're still bonding together, which doesn't surprise me. And is something that's very common in jurors, especially with something as serious as this. But number two, which I didn't bring it up before, but when she said Larry and Kay Woodcock, the victims in the case, seems like they've had some interaction as well. And maybe you guys know about this and I don't, but I think that's interesting. After you sit on the jury on their family member's case, that's a victim in the case, and you become kind of close with them. And she said Larry has comforted her multiple times. I just found that interesting. And I always learn so much when we hear from the jurors afterwards. I love these interviews. So thank you to everyone that sent it to me.
Yeah, he'll get mad at me for saying this, but he tried to tell me that it wasn't bothering him. It was.
And I think he's told me that a year later now when we talk. He goes, at first I thought I was fine, but I realized I wasn't.
Yeah, he wasn't.
Okay, so I got over 600 questions from people all over the world for you. We're not going to go through 600, but here are the main one. Well, I'll go through the main ones. I've got 3 pages. The first one, just to get it out of the way, what is the juror bathroom situation like?
Oh my gosh.
During the breaks? Single stall? Do you have to wait? How does that all work? Because a lot of people want to know, why are the breaks so long?
Yeah, because there was 18 of us.
Right. Explain the process if you can behind the scenes.
Yeah, of course. So when we would leave out of the courtroom, there was a juror room right across, which I noticed the jurors this year aren't using that room, so I don't know where they have them. We are joking that they probably rolled out the red carpet for them.
Okay, yeah, maybe so. Not that you've been back there, you've just been able to see.
Yeah, we can see when they open the door because we knew where we were going.
Right.
And so, so that juror room is where I think originally they had planned to keep us all. They had never had a jury that size before, right? This is the biggest case Ada County has ever had. And so to have, when they're used to probably having maybe 1 or 2 alternates in a room, they had 6 alternates. And we were like sardines in there. It was very close. And there was one bathroom that was like, just like a bathroom in your home.
One bathroom for all of you?
For all of us.
Oh my. And
so I didn't realize this. None of us realized this at the time, but eventually they would let us come out of the room and go down the hall where there was a bathroom that had multiple stalls, like a women and men normal bathroom. But what they were doing was transporting Lori back and forth through that back hallway, and we couldn't see her, because they don't want us to see her like that, right? They want us to see her as just a citizen.
So what would you do the entire?
So they didn't know. You can hear kind of what they knew, what they didn't know about when they would see Lori. This jury's probably thinking the same thing. Chad's in his shirt and tie. So it's just kind of the psyche of when you see the defendant, this is why you have them dressed the way you dress. And this is why it's important where people walk and don't walk in the courtroom, because you want the jury to just be thinking about the trial, thinking about the case, not seeing somebody in an orange jumpsuit for weeks and weeks and weeks. And it's like, they're obviously guilty. They're sitting in prison right now. They may know or they may assume, but it's different on the psyche when you see them in the courtroom.
Time during lunch and breaks when you're all sitting in there, because you can't talk about the case, right?
Not at all.
Not at all to the very end.
Nope.
These are all strangers, at least from the beginning.
Yes. Yeah. They're not strangers now. I mean, there's some of the jurors that are going to be in my life forever. I just love and adore them, and no one can know what we went through except for them. So, so like breaks and lunch. I mean, sometimes our breaks would be long, right? Because there would be other things like, it's fun being on the other side to see
what's happening.
Yeah. But we started out playing card games, and my brain couldn't even handle playing card games after being in there and listening and processing it in my mind, that sometimes I would just, try to get away from everybody almost. And even though you couldn't, I
wonder if she's going to talk about anything that they offer as far as mental health counseling, things like that. Different jurisdictions offer different things, people to talk to during the trial, after the trial, because this was a traumatic trial. What happened to these kids is unimaginable, unbearable to have to watch and see what they saw, because it's really sad for us to look at a lot of these trials and go through a lot of these trials, but we don't hear and see and feel everything a jury does. And handling some cases like this too, the lawyers on the case, you have to compartmentalize, or you can't make the legal arguments and the pushes that you have to make in the case, because so many things come up where it's like, you just have to argue this one off. And if you're just sitting there thinking about the child victim, it's impossible to. And you've got to put it aside, argue this point, and remember the end goal of that justice. And I've heard people lately on a couple cases talk about, we don't talk about the victims, we forget about the victims, not us specifically, but just like generally when we talk about these trials. No, we do. We remember the victims. That's the whole point of why the victims are the reason the civil and criminal justice system is so important. We have to get it right. We have to make it right. We have to protect victims and citizens, secondarily citizens, from being wrongfully accused, wrongfully convicted, because then they become a victim of the system. So victims is the whole point of why we do this. Victims is why I think people listen to this and talk about this stuff and open these discussions and want to learn. We want less victims. And when there are victims, we want justice. So we're not forgetting about it, but we have to do our work in order to protect them. And if we're just sitting here broken and crying and so sad about the victims, which happens in every case, but if that's all we did the whole case, we'd never do anything to help them, right? I mean, sometimes guilt and sadness can cripple people, and then they can't go make a change that needs to happen. They can't have a discussion that needs to happen. They can't put on a fight, put on a defense, put on a prosecution unless they I don't know, I was going to use a horrible analogy like buckle up or button up your pants or something. I don't know. I was going to use a stupid analogy there, but it's like you got to get up and do your job. And that's the point with a lot of this. And that's a lot of what we discuss on here. So I did want to have that one off because it is brutally sad to think about the victims. But what's more sad is to do nothing about it, right? And that's part of this channel.
After a little while, after we started complaining about how close proximity we were to each other and trying to eat lunch, they would clear all the hallways and we would get to go to the jury assembly room for lunch, and they would block all of that off.
Which is across the hall.
Yeah, and it's a huge, nice room.
Right.
And so, yeah, I would just kind of be doing stuff on my phone and just trying to rest my mind from everything.
Could you call your family? Could you call friends?
During the day?
During the break,
yeah. Yeah, we could check our phones and text. The only time that the phones ended up getting taken away is once we started deliberations. Then they were taken away.
Right. So let's go back to before you were picked. You were telling me that you had recently moved to Idaho within a couple of years. So you didn't know anything about the case.
Not a thing. Not a thing.
Did you want to be on the jury? Did you care? Did you?
It's kind of a funny story. So no, I did not want to be on the jury. You know, I have my husband's job makes it so he's out of town for, multiple days at a time. And so I'm just here with the boys by myself.
So that sounds like a hardship. I'm interested to hear how the court and the lawyers handled her hardship.
And my dad had also moved here. He had lived in the same small town for 73 years of his life, and then he moved here to be where we were. But I was worried, about him helping and picking the boys up from school. And, I don't want to stress him out too much either. He's like all new. And so, but he was a huge help. Like he's always there and willing to do whatever. And he did great at it. I shouldn't have been worried about it. But when I first went in for jury duty, I was really upset, because it said that I was going to be on jury duty for a week. And I was like, what am I going to do for a whole week? Like if my husband's gone during that time, how is that all going to work? Because I didn't know a lot of people here. I hadn't become close with people yet, enough to put my children in their hands.
Right. And you're thinking 1 week.
Yes. Yeah. Originally. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so I went in, and that first day I was the first group to go in and sit in the courtroom. And Judge Boyce said a bunch of things. I couldn't really hear anything. I don't know if the mic wasn't working or what, but I could hardly hear him. All I heard was murder. And I was like, what am I doing? Like what? I still didn't understand. And he said we would be shown downstairs to a room and fill out a questionnaire. And I looked at the name. I had no idea. I had never heard of the name.
So she's new to the area, which I think is really interesting too, and makes sense. It's like a certain kind of juror is more likely to get picked, which it also interests me. Like if you're in the Karen Reed case from, Canton, everybody's from Canton, been Canton forever. If you're in some of these, old towns where generationally families have been there, do you want those families on the jury or do you want brand new people? And if we want brand new people, why do we pick our jurors from the counties in which people live? Right? We want the jurors to be in the counties where their decisions are going to affect the safety and the livelihood of the citizens and people they work and live with and know. Not know too well, but don't know well enough, right? We don't want somebody from Tampa going up to Boston and making that decision. But do we want somebody from Canton that knows all the players? No. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy, but she was new, which makes sense. She didn't know anything about the case. Seems like the perfect juror to me. And seems possible she can do it even though she has a hardship because her dad lives there and her husband's there at least part of the time when he's not traveling for work. So obviously we know she ends up on the jury.
And asked all these questions. I didn't know, you know, it had like.
So she just heard murder. She's sent down to a room to answer a questionnaire. This is the whirlwind jurors are thrown into. So we got to give them some grace too.
Of people. Do you know any of these people? No, I don't know anyone here. I didn't know where Madison County or Fremont County, or I didn't know where.
You're the perfect juror. Honestly,
like looking back on it, I really was.
Yeah.
And I had been to Yellowstone, so I'd been through
that.
Yeah, but I didn't know like that was the county it was in.
Right.
We'd been to Bear World the summer before, but I didn't know that was in Rexburg. Like because you just really don't think about it when you're just going. Yeah.
As a tourist, yeah.
Yeah. So
then you get picked.
So then I get picked. Yeah. Well, I go through even before that when they go and do, you know, questioning the jurors. And they had asked if we had any hardships that would make this really hard. And I had written on there my situation, you know, that I could possibly have my dad help, but it would be really difficult. And so I didn't raise my hand when they asked that again, because so many people had made comments of like I would lose pay and really actual hardships. And I was like, okay, I got to suck this up and just kind of keep going. Well,
wow. So her life was going to be more difficult. She doesn't know these victims. She doesn't know these defendants. She doesn't know anything about the case. She has a hardship, as basically everybody does when they think it's a 1-week trial, let alone multi-week trial. But when she hears the hardships of others, she's like, that's a real hardship. How about that perspective? Holy cow, how about that perspective? A lot of respect for this woman. If more people were like her, the jury system, I think, would work better, where it's like, it's hard for all of us, but can I make it work? And if you're losing your whole pay for 8 weeks, like, no, you can't make that work. If you have a family and you're the sole breadwinner, probably can't make that work. If you run a business and you're the only person that can run it, you might not be able to make that work. But she looked at her situation again after initially thinking this is way too much. And then she's like, maybe I could do it. And I bet the victims are incredibly thankful, and the defendant. Maybe not be happy with the result, but did her job and gave her a fair shake. Interesting.
When Jim Archibald came to ask, and he asked me about the comments I had made, and I reiterated what I had said to him. And he asked something along the lines of, do you want to be on this jury? And I kind of looked at him and I looked at Judge Boyce, and I was like, I was almost nervous to say it, but I was like, no, I don't want to be. And Judge Boyce is like, well, I appreciate your comments, but just because you don't want to be on the jury doesn't mean that we'll give you a pass.
Right.
You know, not exact words, but along those lines. So I left there and I just knew I was going to be picked.
You did?
Yeah, I just had it in my gut that I was going to be picked.
So then you walk in the first day and you hear the indictment, you hear the charges.
Yeah.
And you see Lori Vallow for the first time.
Oh, that's another funny thing. So when we, you know, they were questioning us, I didn't know she was the defendant. I thought she was part of the defense team.
When she was in there with her team?
Yes.
Oh, you thought she was an attorney?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean,
isn't that interesting? So some defendants, it's obvious. Some it's not. And I feel like, maybe because Chad Daybell doesn't have a jacket on, but I feel like he could be mistaken for a lawyer too. It's so interesting to get the jurors' perspectives, because that's what none of us probably thought that. None of us probably thought they thought Lori was a lawyer, right? But they did.
She was dressed up. She wasn't in her jail outfit.
Right, exactly. So I didn't, and I'm sure Judge Boyce said that, but you're just you're in a room that you've never been in with people, I'd never served on jury duty. I didn't know.
In court terminology, if you're not familiar with it, you don't know.
And you can totally miss stuff. Yeah, Nate's right. Court terminology, these jurors who, if they're not into watching trials and they don't know anything about it, they've never had any personal experience in court cases, and you're thrown in there, you might not even know what the defendant and a plaintiff is. You may not know, who's what's on first, who's on second, right? You might just not know that stuff, and you're thrown in and you're now the biggest decision maker in the room. And I get that people don't like that, but it's almost like throw all the other baggage and crap away that people think they already know how the system should work and what the answer should be before they show up. And maybe we want a clean slate. And there is something to that, to jury selection and jury duty, and why it is part of our system. Because a clean slate, you've got to prove it to that person now. They don't come in with a decision, a preconceived notion. You got to do your job as the lawyers, as law enforcement, etc.
What they're saying. I mean, it's going fast. You don't know what's happening.
Yeah. And I just felt like everybody knew each other because he was naming, talking to the attorneys, he knew all their names. And I was really confused. So
some attorneys like that, and that can be strategy, and everybody knows each other, especially as the criminal defense attorneys. It's like, yeah, we don't hate each other. We're not the bad guys. We're not horrible. We're all friends. We all know each other. We all trust each other, whether they do or not. In front of the jury, you don't want the jury coming in and being like, oh, they're the ones that are ostracized. Because throughout a lot of the process, it's like the judge, a lot of times former state attorney or whatever, you got the prosecutors, you got law enforcement, you got everybody that's kind of on most of the witnesses, the victims, they're all on one side, and the defense can be kind of ostracized. So for the jurors to not feel that when they walk in, I think is a good thing.
first day going in there and he read the indictment. Well, I'll back up a little bit. So when he was telling, or when the prosecution was asking us questions, they mentioned something about minor children and would this be difficult? And I was like, you know, I had a 10 and 7-year-old at home, and I raised my hand. You know, I felt like I needed to be honest about that. And I said, yeah, you know, I didn't realize I didn't know it was going to be a 7-year-old. You know, even when she said minor children, I thought 18. I don't know. I just didn't think it was going to be a little boy.
Yeah.
And so it took a long time to let that all sink in. Even the first day, you know, the only thing I remember Lindsay Blake saying was, and she never told us where her children were. And I thought, as a mom, I know where my kids are all the time. All the time. I know exactly where they are. And that, you know, I couldn't.
You know when I think Lindsay Blake made that statement? Opening statements. That's the first thing that she has said that any lawyer said. Opening statements. And just throw this in with the research that a lot of jurors, I'm not going to say make up their mind is not the right verbiage, but start to lean away or start to feel a certain way from opening statements more than they change their mind in closing arguments. And certain facts that you throw out hit hard, like Lindsay Blake did against Lori Vallow, and this juror remembered it.
Didn't even fathom that, not knowing where your kids are and not like helping people look for it.
Right.
So
was there a moment, this is probably the number one question,
okay,
a moment in your mind where you said she's guilty?
There was not a moment, because it was all circumstantial and because it was so convoluted that it took a long time for me to even really get, you know, they kept repeating the dates. And as a spectator looking at it, I'm like, you've said that 50 times, but then I think about when I was there, I needed that reminder of those dates. And, you know, like that was a week after Charles was killed. That was, you know, a week after Tammy died, or that was, you know, the day of. You actually need that because it's, you know, like drinking out of a fire hose. It's so much. And
did you take notes?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah. I didn't use them when I went. No, because for me, that's part of my memory process is writing. I mean, even when I was in college, that was part of my, you know,
very common. Like you write it down and you remember it regardless of if you go back and look at them or use them.
Helping me remember things was writing it down.
And for the people at home, they may not know, you can't keep those notes.
Nope.
And you can't take them home at the end of the day.
Nope.
They stay at the courthouse. When the court's over, they're gone.
They're gone.
Do you wish you could have kept them? You don't want them?
No. I mean, what would I do with them? You know, right. I don't need that level of detail, you know, and I would like make comments in there about what was being said or how a witness was being treated because I had no other way to vent about things that I didn't like going on. And so I don't want anyone to read that. I want it to just be gone. You know, you say things or you feel a certain way and, you know, stepping back and looking at it and doing more research on the defense team. They're good guys doing a job that needs to be done. And I have no anger for them. I'm not, you know, mad or she deserved to have a defense and she deserved to have the jury that she did.
Did you?
So that's interesting. So she did some research on the defense team and thinks they're not bad guys. I kind of think that's one of the things they argued in opening statement and closing argument. They wanted the jury to feel that way, that they weren't bad guys. I don't feel that way about John Pryor. That's just an interesting juxtaposition. I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong. You guys can let me know which one you think is better for the defendant, which one you like more, whatever it may be. But interesting that she said that she doesn't think they're bad guys, think they're fine, they're good guys, they did their job, and she deserves a defense. I wonder if people are going to feel the same way about John Pryor, and if we hear from the jurors after. I'm sure Nate's going to get some interviews with jurors after this case. So that'll be interesting. It's also going to be interesting to see how much jurors in this case knew about the whole situation, knowing that Lori's case had already happened, not with cameras, but still pretty high profile.
Want a defense, though? Were you waiting like when they fight?
Yes. I was like, feels so empty. And when she said, or when the defense said, we don't think the prosecution has proved their case, I was mad.
Really?
Because your kids were buried in your husband's backyard and you have no defense. You're disgusting evil. I won't.
So she has a right to have a defense. But then she said, you're evil because you don't have a defense for why your kids were buried in the backyard. That's interesting. Seems like she feels like, and again, please, this juror seems amazing. I'm just analyzing it from a lawyer's brain, okay? Looking at a juror, picking it apart to discuss, you know, what she might be thinking and not saying at certain parts, okay? So I want every caveat with that. I don't want anybody to attack her. I'm not attacking her. But with statements like that, sometimes it sounds like people, again, and it's kind of the norm for people to expect the defense to prove something. Now, maybe she's going to say, and then I realized the state has all the burden. I don't know. Like I said, it's first time watching it together. But for her to say, how do you not have a defense for why it was buried on Chad Daybell's backyard? I would not say that's enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Lori Vallow is guilty. There's a lot more, and they did prove it, in my opinion. But that alone, not having a defense for that, seems like the defense needs to prove something or disprove something.
Say who it was, but somebody on the law enforcement side said that my looks gave it all away about how I felt about her.
Speaking of your looks, I don't know if I'll ever forget, because you're my wife's age, and I assumed, and I could tell, or I thought you had kids, because there was the day that they showed the autopsy photos. I was closely watching the jurors, and you were front row center, and I noticed that you had tears and that you were looking up instead of at the monitor in front of you.
Yeah.
Would you say that was the hardest day?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I've dealt with the trauma and I'm okay, but when I really think about how I really felt, it was really sad, like there's nothing good that came out of that other than the fact that I know some amazing people now, and I have so much love and admiration for Kay and Larry and what they went through. But my little guy was 7, the same age as when they, those monsters, to an autistic 7-year-old. Like, what kind of evil do you have to be to do that?
And listen, this is a lot of stuff that we talked about early on in the case. And to think about the jury hearing this for the first time, going back there and having these conversations, it's not a surprise it goes the way it goes.
Then put him in your backyard, like in a shallow grave. And I know when they showed his diaper, I was like so angry, like that's what he said. I was just really angry, and I couldn't keep taking it in. And so that was my way of dealing with it, is just not staring at it. But I'll never forget it.
What do you do when you get home and see your kids that day? Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember very well. I hugged them and I was angry. And my oldest had a baseball game that night, and I just sat there the whole time and cried watching it. And my dad was sitting next to me, and he just put his hand on my leg and he said, "Rough day, huh?" And I said, "Yeah," because you can't say anything else, And I think that's probably the toughest, is going home, and home is normal. I mean, my husband didn't follow it because we didn't want to accidentally say something to each other. Or
how smart is that? I mean, again, these people literally went above and beyond to follow the rules, put guardrails in place. I mean, this is exactly what I want to hear as a trial lawyer. Just FYI, like, forget about how's she going to disprove this? Fine. We all know jurors expect that, right? Tell us why it's not you. Jurors expect that. I get it. Explaining burden shifting and the defense not having a burden is so hard. And we always try to do it. Never hits perfectly because people are people, right? But holy cow, is she doing everything you ask a juror to do?
Had that temptation.
Even as a defense attorney, doing everything you're asking her to do.
Talking to each other about it. So he just never followed it at all. And I don't know if that was the right way to go about it, because he couldn't have the compassion for what I'd gone through. He just wanted to make it normal for me when I got home.
Right.
And I couldn't switch my brain off at all.
Right.
Even driving from the courthouse, the right road that I take to come home from the courthouse, I couldn't drive down that road for a while.
After the trial?
After the trial.
Because you'd have flashbacks?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. I wasn't sleeping. I was having nightmares. And it's weird because that wasn't happening during the trial. It was after it was over. So it was almost like I had a job to do. But when that job was done, that's when all the stuff kept coming up. And I knew I needed counseling. But the courts provided us with 6 sessions. They do not provide us with any sort of contacts at all. And being new to the area, I didn't know where to go.
So they just say, we'll pay for 6 sessions, find your own counselor, try to get in, and then they reimburse? Or
Yep, exactly.
There you go. Answers. We get answers with Nate Eaton. That's what it should be called. Answers with Nate Eaton. That's what he should call these interviews. But that's cool and that's interesting. So, but it shows a gap, right? They should provide contacts. They know it. The court knows it. People are involved in these cases all the time. There are experts. There are court-appointed people. Easily, you could let people know a few names if you're new to the area. Again, the perfect juror, the best jurors don't know anything about the case, more likely to be new to the area. But thankful for her. I mean, she at least made, 16 new friends as the other jurors, or however many it was. And maybe they gave her contacts. I'm not sure, but it sounds like she also did the right thing there and got counseling afterwards.
That was another big question. How have you dealt with the trauma? And you mentioned therapy and that helped.
Yep. I did EMDR, which I can't
Is that
fully.
the eye movement?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't explain it. And I know it doesn't work for everyone, but it was so amazing. I couldn't believe, I mean, it took the 6 sessions for sure. And I had my final session after the sentencing and I felt really good after that. But yeah, my counselor was amazing. Like, I don't know how I would have dealt with it had I not done that. I mean, it would have kept lingering, and I probably, you know, you don't know how your mind is going to work after that and like what's going to come out of that. But I think it was so good for me to do that.
Was there one piece of evidence that was like the most compelling, like the autopsy photos, that like really you're like, okay, this is it?
Boy, like them being buried in his backyard.
That was.
How can you get past that? That's what I think.
And then you have John Pryor. Again, we're thinking about this in the middle of the Daybell trial. You have John Pryor being like, what's the connection to Chad Daybell? What's the connection to Chad Daybell? He had nothing to do with this. If they connected it back to Lori Vallow that it was in Chad Daybell's yard, how do you think they're going to connect it back to Chad Daybell? It's like, that's why we try to break down some arguments. We try to see it from both sides. But at the end of the day, it's a tough one for Chad Daybell. I don't see how he ever wins this case, no matter how many times he got to try it.
About through this whole trial is it was his backyard. And I think why there, I think I even asked you this question yesterday, is like, why did he put them in his backyard? Because in Eastern Idaho, for those that don't know, there's nothing. It is a lot of nothing. And they could have been anywhere. And as horrible as it sounds, I'm glad they were there so that we could find them.
Yeah. You're right. They could have driven 5 minutes in any direction.
And nobody would have ever found them.
Yeah. This is an interesting question. Did you feel the need to spoil your kids when the trial was over?
I don't think so.
No.
Just loving them.
Love them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That is an interesting question.
Yeah.
I didn't tell my kids, my 10-year-old, you know, obviously my 7-year-old wouldn't have understood. He understood that I was gone and on jury, and, you know, my 10-year-old wanted to know what it was about. And I told him we wouldn't be talking about it because it was not good.
Right.
And so, yeah, he would just come, when I would come home, he would come to the door and hug me. And that was really all I needed.
Yeah. Did you ever just stare at Lori to try to get inside her head? Maybe not out of anger. I'm sure there were many moments.
There was mostly anger.
Yes.
But
was there ever just to watch her reaction? Was there ever a time?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that also added to the anger, right? I mean, for the people who weren't there, she would flirt with her attorneys and snuggle up and be laughing. And that would make me angry because I'm sitting there away.
Interesting to know that they're flirting without necessarily knowing what they're saying. But once again, our eyes are open when we hear this stuff, right? We wonder and we talk about it. And I try to tell you that regardless of if it's evidence or not, which technically it's not, the jurors watch the defendants and the plaintiffs if it's a civil case. They watch the parties, they see what they're doing. And if we apply this to Chad Daybell, what's he doing? To me, about as normal as you can look. Karen Reed, applied to that case, some people are saying she looks too angry, or she doesn't look angry enough, or she's not sad enough, whatever it may be. People have their opinions. And I'm not saying about whether they're attractive or not attractive, or, you know, the way their hair is done or whatever. I'm talking about how they're reacting to things and looking in the trial. The jury is absolutely watching that. And interesting here for her to say, you know, she's flirting and whatever with her attorneys, kind of goes in the John Pryor, Chad Daybell manipulative based on being pretty thing. Maybe the jurors felt that way somewhat with her trial.
From my family doing this, and you think it's a joke? It was so disgusting. And
this is during the trial. So do we think her mind was made up at some point as she learned and listened to the evidence and watched Lori's reaction, and she's breaking down every day hearing about what happened to Lori's kids, and that's how Lori's acting?
See her doing that too in Arizona. She lives in some other dimension. I mean,
the other question about her that people asked is, did you feel, a lot of people say they can feel it, and I don't want to say energy because energy's been brought up, but like, did you feel an evil presence, or did you feel just not right with her? And then with Chad, as you've been coming to Chad's trial a few days, did you feel anything with them?
Not for Lori, not in the beginning. I didn't feel that way because I didn't know. I didn't know. And she looks normal, you know, it's just like, it's, you know, the whole old thing of monsters and evil people don't have to look like monsters. Mm-hmm. They can be very normal and attractive people. And so I guess maybe I was a little naive going into it, you know, not thinking that anyone could do that sort of horrible crime to their own children. I just can't get over that. And then with Chad, he's a soulless man. That's what I see when I walk in there.
Do you feel like one was leading the other now that?
Not exactly like soft words for them, right? Which I tend to agree with the facts that we know in this case.
You sat through all of Lori's into Chad's.
Yeah, I think it was both of them.
Both of them equal.
It is mind-boggling how people can get to this point. And while we, hope for rehabilitation and redemption and for them to turn their lives around and realize how horrible they've been and the wrongs of their ways, it's like these people specifically, it's like are a next level.
I would say a little more Chad, because I don't think she would have done that to her kids if it was her on her own.
Mm-hmm.
But they were feeding off of each other for sure. Like they're the perfect word of co-conspiracy.
We were just talking about how, like, they have these phone conversations, and whenever they're talking light and dark and how they're the saviors of the world, it's like that's really what got them going. That's what they loved the most.
And then
puts more on Chad than Lori, but convicted Lori, which I think is interesting. What will Chad's jury think?
Them bringing Alex into it was their way of saying I didn't do it. That's my thought. I mean, we'll never know.
If you could talk to Lori, would you want to?
No.
You wouldn't?
No.
Do you have anything you want to ask her? Or you just
no.
Same with Chad?
Nope.
When it came time to deliberate, I think you all went back. Was it a Thursday afternoon?
Mm-hmm.
And then we remember being in the courtroom and dinner was brought in.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought, oh, they're going to stick it out through the night. They must be closed. And then like an hour later, you dismissed. And then came back Friday and we had it around lunchtime, I think, that afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Was there, and you could say as much as you want about deliberations or not as much. I understand a lot of people, don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But what would you want to say about that process? Because that was also asked a lot.
Yeah, I won't talk about deliberations very much because I think that everyone should have the chance to tell their own story.
Yeah.
What I will say is that I couldn't have asked for a better group of people to do this with. A bunch of strangers, different views, different backgrounds, different places in their life. And we all came together without any outside influence. And we made a decision that was right and correct. And
wow, if that's not jury service defined, I don't know what is. A bunch of different people, different backgrounds, diverse, different viewpoints, different experiences, no outside influence, came together and we made the right decision. Every juror should feel this way. Every juror, especially with a guilty verdict, should feel they absolutely got the right decision. They should be resolute and firm and strong in their decision to convict.
My biggest fear going into it was that I was going to find her not guilty, and I felt like the world wanted her guilty, even though I didn't know.
That's kind of interesting. Her biggest fear was she was going to find her not guilty. We definitely don't want jurors to be afraid of finding somebody not guilty. And we definitely don't want jurors feeling that the world is going to be mad at you if you find the defendant not guilty. I don't know if it was just that she knew there was media presence there. And again, this case is a much smaller version of Bryan Kohberger. And this is exactly what Kohberger's defense team is arguing, that they don't want the jury to feel, that they should fear a not guilty verdict, and they should fear the world hating them for their not guilty verdict. That's an interesting comment. What do you guys think about that?
No, because why would it be a big deal if people didn't think she was guilty?
Yeah.
So I would tell the people that I was close to
that be a big deal because they think somebody's wrongfully accused. Not that I'm saying that with Lori Vallow. I'm just saying it could be a big deal in the public.
I wasn't going to say whether I was an alternate or not because I didn't want them to be upset with me if I didn't come to the right conclusion. Ooh. But the process was very respectful, and it was what any defendant should want going into that. If I was on the other side and I was trying to defend myself against something that I didn't do, I would want a jury like we had.
Yeah, that's high marks.
Yeah.
You're right. That's what people would want. So you left the courthouse after the verdict. Do you remember what you did?
Yeah, a group of us went to a restaurant and had some.
A group of jurors?
Mm-hmm.
With spouses or just the
yeah.
jurors? Yeah.
Well, Tom and his wife were there.
Right.
And then some other jurors.
And did you talk about the case? Like
everything. And we talked and talked and talked and talked. And then I had to come home because my dad was home with the boys.
Yeah.
So, but our waitress had served John Thomas and Jim Archibald earlier at lunch that day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And she made the connection.
Yeah, she heard us talking. Yeah.
That's funny because the night before opening statements, I walked into Chipotle and John and Jim were there. And so was it?
You're like, I'm not going to talk to you.
Right. When you're all staying like downtown, you run into those people.
Yeah. Boise's not big.
Right. So you ended up deciding to go to Lori's sentencing. And just a couple of, I mean, it was like 3 or 4 of you, I think.
There was 4 of us.
4. Why?
I needed the closure. I had talked to, so we all had a barbecue. Not everyone came, but we all had a barbecue after it was over. And I was talking to one of the other jurors, who is a really good friend now. And I was like, I really want to go to the sentencing. And she's like, I do too. Because at first I thought, is that weird to want to go to the sentencing? And so we talked with Randy, the jury commissioner, and asked him what that would look like if we wanted to go. And Judge Boyce is so amazing. He wants to take care of us. And he's like, if anytime you want to be in my court, you guys can be there.
Wow.
So,
and you've been able to come to this trial.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you?
That's how judges should act, and most of them do. They really are nice and respectful to jurors.
Think that you would have voted for the death penalty if Lori had been found guilty and it was on the table?
At the time, yes, I would have, without a doubt.
At the time. So has that changed? And if it's changed, why has it changed? Very interesting. She would have voted at the time because she was so angry, it feels like. And that is, you know, one of the key components of the death penalty is you got to be pretty angry at the person. It doesn't always win the day, but very interesting.
I've had to think about the death penalty more since then. And I think our system is broken. I mean, I think you even said the other night, and I followed the Thomas Creech failed attempt at the death penalty. And I think that's cruel, the way it went down. You know, I think if you're going to do it, it needs to be humane, and it needs to be not 40 years later or 10 years later. It needs to happen, you know. If a juror convicts, and that's the problem with Thomas Creech, is he wasn't given the death penalty by a jury, it was by a judge. I think if you're going to do it, it needs to be a jury of 12 who all agree that based on Idaho law that he deserves the death penalty, and that it doesn't, you know, you let the appeals process play out because you never want to, you know, put somebody on death row that doesn't deserve to be there. But I wouldn't vote for the death penalty. I mean, you would have to if you were in that situation and, you know, you're given specific instructions, but I don't think we should have the death penalty until our system works better.
So fix the system before
First.
You elect to put people to death.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then I guess that kind of answers my question for Chad.
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't do it
Mm-mm.
until the system's fixed.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Has there been a day that you have not thought about the trial since it happened?
Not many. When I went to the sentencing, I got a little 5x7 card from Kay and Larry. It has Tylee and JJ on the front of it and a little note from them on the back that they were handing out to other people too. And I have that picture where I get ready in the morning, and I don't know how you say
It really impacts people. You know, it really can. I should say it probably doesn't the same for everybody, but this is the world we live in, you know, and if we all take part in our society and do our civic duty, like people talk about, makes you feel like we're doing life together. Maybe it would make you care about people more, care about your neighbor more, love your neighbor, not be as selfish as, you know, we are normally in America. And it's just kind of cool to see how you're forced into being an important person in this victim's family's lives and defendant's life. And you take it seriously and it affects your life. And you're bonded with them and with the other jurors. It's really interesting.
Stop thinking about it. I feel love for them. That is weird because it's like I will never get to meet them and I never knew them, but I feel love for them and I want them to be honored in not the way they died, but the way they lived.
Was there one witness that really stuck out to you?
Sulema.
Was that game changer? You believed her?
I think that a witness can be believed even though they're not telling the whole story.
You know, there's some questions.
Yeah.
We just heard from Zulema recently. She was one of the later witnesses, and she was the biggest one or most impactful or one of the most impactful to this juror. Interesting.
The way that her journal that they put up on screen, and the way it was very authentic, right? You could tell that it was real. Like she was jotting things down and circling and arrows.
She took a lot of notes.
Yeah. That was real. And it explained to me in the clearest way possible with something so insane of why they did. It was the binding, it was the burning, it was, you know, the dark and light scale. It was all of that was a big one for me. And I thought she did really good this time. You know, no matter what you think, you can dislike her as a person, but I think I think she helped in this case.
She seemed to me more at ease this time around. Much more confident in speaking. And I think she was on much longer this time. Was there any witness that you didn't believe or that you had? And you don't have to say if you don't want to.
I have like mixed feelings, but Audrey Bertario.
That was asked about a lot.
Yeah.
What was it about that?
I believed that she was innocent and that she didn't understand what was going on and she wanted to be somebody. I think she probably has low self-esteem and was looking to be somebody, and they filled that for her.
I think they did that for a lot of people potentially. It's part of their manipulation.
But I had a really hard time with the way she came about it. And I think that Chamar Chapal had a point. Like, all this time you've never said this, and now you're going to say it in front of this jury. Was she looking for her moment?
For those unfamiliar, she claimed at the very end of the...
So we hear that in a lot of cases. You've never said this except for in front of this jury. And at least some jurors think, well, are they just trying to get their 15 minutes of fame?
Recross.
Yeah.
Recross that Lori Vallow threatened to kill her. And she was quite descriptive in the way that Lori had threatened to kill her. It didn't come up during the main testimony. It didn't come up during cross. It didn't come up during the grand jury proceedings. And so this suddenly came out of like nowhere. And Jim Archibald stood up and really kind of was like, you expect us to believe this stuff?
Yeah.
I wondered if there were doubts in your mind too, that this kind of came out of nowhere.
I think he had every right to talk to her like that. You know, it might have happened, but you didn't have any right to bring it up at that point.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know. That's honesty.
I appreciate the honesty. I mean, everybody's got an opinion. And after the trial was over, did you read any of Chad's books or Visions of Glory?
No.
And you probably don't care to.
No.
Did you watch any of the media coverage from the case?
Yes, lots and lots and lots.
You wanted to do a deep dive, like
I had so many unanswered questions, and it was the only way that I could fill that void of figuring things out in my mind and making sense of everything that I couldn't get enough. And there was a group that I would text with and find.
Really interesting, right? So even after being the one in the juror's seat, they still felt like they needed more information. So they went out, got it from other sources. And again, not as reliable and potentially accurate as what came out during trial, but help giving context to what they learned and what they knew and what they took part in.
Things. And did you know? I mean, it started on the van ride from the courthouse back to our cars.
that quick. You pull up your phone.
Yeah. One of the alternates had already been looking because.
Which tells you they probably didn't do any of it during the trial, which is good. If she was like, I waited a few days to look up anything, it's like, really? You just spent weeks of your life invested in this? You didn't want to know any more? But no, immediately in the van ride, they couldn't wait to look and find out more about the case, which people may have a problem with that. But after it's done, they're allowed to do that. And to me, that shows like you wait and you hold off and don't do something you want to do for a long time. You're going to want to do it immediately when you can.
We had a verdict, so they were released from duty. And so she was filling us in on what she had found so far. I mean, the biggest question, which I think it was really good that they brought out more about why Alex died, because it felt so secretive during our trial. And it was such a big question that, although I don't believe that it was natural causes, I think that if they had just said, he had an autopsy and it was natural causes, that it wouldn't have been such a big deal to us,
Do you think it really was natural causes?
No, I don't. No.
Do you have a theory?
Well, she talked about him going to Mexico.
Right.
I don't know enough about different drugs to know, could they cause these things to look naturally? I don't know enough to say that. So it's maybe just a gut feeling.
There were also times I wondered, in your case and this case, are the jurors following all the names? Because not only do you have their given names, you have their alternate names, and new names are thrown out like Phoebe and Lily and Amy. And
well, even the detective or Agent Hart who testified yesterday was getting confused on who Hiplos was.
Right.
And I forgot for a little while too.
Yeah.
They had me confused. So yeah, I don't think so. I don't know how you could, and it doesn't matter in the end.
Right. I was going to say at the end, though, ultimately that didn't trip you all up.
No.
People are asking, and you don't have to go into this, but an overall view, not necessarily on yours, although that would be the only case about how deliberations work when you get back in the room. Is it like you all just shout out your opinion? There's a leader that, and again, you don't have to go into the detail if you want, but just like the procedural.
They don't tell us. They don't give us any instruction.
Really?
We have the instructions on, for each charge, these lists of things have to all be met for this to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And it was deliberate to make sure that we all said yes on every single thing. So that's as far as I'll say.
You mentioned you thought Judge Boyce did well.
He's amazing. I have so much respect for him, because there's probably times he has such a poker face, but there's probably times like yesterday that he didn't want this to be happening, but he was fair. He listened to both sides. And during the trial, I could tell when he was going to rule, like what way he was going to rule objectively looking at it. And I think he was fair because I could predict it.
Interesting, not knowing the rules of evidence, feeling like she was starting to get a vibe on which way he was going to rule. That's interesting.
Based on past, and he was principled about how he was ruling.
And also, it seems like she's very smart. So picking up on things and starting to learn maybe what is hearsay, what's allowed, what's not, what's relevant, things like that. It's very interesting. It's like when you do this is why sometimes jurors get really interested in trials and the law if they sit on a jury. Very interesting to me.
Not in favor of one or the other. So
she didn't think he was in favor of one or the other, which is obviously what you want and what you want to hear as a judge.
Yeah, I don't know what public opinion is about him, but I think he is an outstanding judge.
How about your views of the prosecutors?
I thought they did a lot better laying out the case this time than they did the first time and getting the story out. They were very respectful.
I agree. I actually agree with that. I think I loved opening statement last time, but some of it was a little confusing. And I thought maybe it was just me because I was only listening to it. I couldn't watch it. This time I feel like they're setting him up and knocking him down like crazy, even with some good cross-examination from John Pryor.
receptive to
Definitely think John Pryor is doing better on cross than Archibald and Thomas did.
our comments after the trial and, you know, what we saw and laying things out. And I could tell that they took those into consideration.
Oh, so the prosecutors got to talk to this jury after the trial. They took their comments and laying things out. I mean, imagine getting to take the test a second time after talking to the teacher about the answers. Ooh, that's interesting. So that makes sense on why it is better this time. At least just from my perspective. So the jurors went in. There's nothing wrong with that. Talking to them about the case. I've done it a million times. I just have never tried the case again after talking to the jury when they told me what the important parts are. And I will say with a new jury, very different things can be important. Like when we focus group things or have mock juries, multiple mock juries or focus groups say very different things. And we try to take it all and synthesize it. And where are the connections and the commonalities? But that is very interesting to me.
I think their heart's in it in the right place. I think it's a huge case for an area that doesn't have these types of cases. I mean, the whole state doesn't deal with this. And so, yeah,
more now than ever, but
I think they did a good job.
And your view of the defense, you kind of mentioned that earlier, that had they been able to do their job, it may have been different.
Yeah, yeah. All they could do really is attack the witness in their profession. And I didn't like that. You know, I thought it was really low level stuff. And, but now knowing what I know why they were doing that. They had they didn't have anything else.
Yeah.
So what were they going to do?
Here's an interesting one. Has your exposure to the case triggered positive?
So it's like they expect the defense to do something, and when all they do is attack the witness, they don't like it. And again, it's interesting juxtapositioning this case with Karen Reed's case, where some people in the community seem to love when a witness is attacked if they feel a certain way about the defense, and they hate when a witness is attacked when they feel a certain way about the defense or the defendant. Very interesting to watch these multiple trials at the same time and have some, you know, history here on YouTube, watching and discussing cases with large groups of people, and you start to understand and see the differences. And it's what's funny and crazy about it is it's exactly what we've always felt in just our one little law firm, and how trials and juries and our research and what we learn, it's very similar. Now there's some crazy, awesome things that I get to learn that I never would have thought about, but there are other things where it's like, yeah, you get them on your side early and they'll stick with you. And things that are really bad in other cases may be really good in some cases, depending on how they feel about the defendant or the case or the lawyers even sometimes.
Changes in your life?
Appreciating the people who are there for you when things are hard. And my jury friends, we've gone through some hard times in the last year. And I think that those bonds are amazing, and it's sort of what life is all about, is having people that you can relate to like that. I've never had that before. And so you know, you have friends and you know, they're good friends, but to go through something like that and to be a friend afterwards and to go through other things together, I would say that's probably the biggest thing for me.
The legal system, if you could change things, you mentioned it'd probably be wise if the court gave you a list of counselors that are available.
Yeah.
That might be one suggestion you'd have.
Yep.
Anything else? I mean, should jurors be paid more? Should there be more accommodations for jurors?
They treated us so well. I don't think jurors should be paid more, because I don't want people doing it for the money.
And it was what, $40 a day? Or?
After a while, it went up to 40 or 50. I can't remember. I mean, we got a good check. I mean, it wasn't like anything you could do anything with,
Right.
but
It was something.
yeah, it was something. It's taxed, so it's like, you know, the
Here's your
government's
30, but I mean, you don't go on jury duty obviously for money.
yeah, and you should never.
Right.
But I think you should serve on a
Very
jury.
astute point. That sure, people shouldn't, it's got to be a balance to where it's like they're not ruining their lives financially, but also not getting rich is obviously a little bit of a stretch, but you know, making money, or where they're like trying to force their way on a jury for the check.
I think maybe that's another thing that's changed, is my view of being on a jury and telling people when they have jury duty to not look at it as a negative, because we all want to live in a safe society with rules and laws, and people get consequences when they.
Love it. I love it. I love it. It's the echoing, you know, it's so cool to hear this. I love to hear her say this. I hope everybody watches this interview and listens to at least this part, when people that sit on the hardest, longest cases in our country are telling you it's worth it. Do it. It's not a negative. It's a positive for our society. We all care about each other. We should care about society.
Murder their children, or they do something else, you know, that they need consequences, and they also deserve to have a trial by jury. And if we don't change our attitude about that, then you can't complain when justice isn't served.
How did you feel about Lori crying during the trial when she asked to
Don't
be
complain about the system if you won't help it. If you won't do your small part, just show up. You might not get picked for the trial. Do your small part. Try to make it the best justice system in the world. Then if it still sucks, go ahead and complain about it. But do your part. And if everybody did their part the way she did, I think the justice system would be better. I can honestly say that about her after listening to this interview, which makes me feel happy.
dismissed and not see the autopsy photos?
We didn't know that.
That's right. You were all out of the courtroom.
Yep. Yeah, I didn't know that till after it was all done.
And what did you think when you heard it?
Mad. I mean, disgusting.
Do you think Lori Vallow cares about anything?
Other than herself? No.
What do you think has changed watching Chad's versus Lori's? Like, are you noticing differences? You mentioned the prosecution's laying out the case better. There's obviously a defense, much more of a defense.
Yeah, which I think is good. We want him to have a defense, even if I don't like John Pryor and the way he goes about things. He's doing it by himself, and he's actually doing a defense. So, I mean, say what you want about him, he at least is doing his job. And
couldn't have said it better myself.
And it's a complicated feeling, right? Because on one hand, you're so angry that he's defending Chad, but on the other hand, you're like, that's what you're supposed to do, and we want that, and we need that. The other thing, other than the not knowing about Alex, but also their explanation of the gun and how it misfired and comparing it to a paintball gun. So they weren't allowed to show a paintball gun last year, and I was so confused. I didn't know what a paintball gun looked like. I was like, how could it actually look like a rifle? It does. And so I think that played a bigger part, and I do think it was more important this time around to show that they did try once and it failed, and they went about it a different way with Tammy. I have a question for you.
Okay.
What was it like in Hawaii when you approached her? Because I didn't see that till afterwards, and I didn't put it all together in the timing and everything till you recently aired it.
Well, I didn't know if I'd get to talk to her. Like, we were just waiting there to see what was going to happen. I didn't know if they were going to arrest her or whatever. And so in my mind, obviously I was going to ask where are the kids. And then one of the officers came over and said, you know what I'd really like to know? Why they're over here in Hawaii on the beach and her kids are missing.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And then they said, we're at the arrest.
Like why from the jump in this case, you're like, something ain't right.
So I just kind of went with it, and I knew that I had to keep asking the questions because you never know if maybe one will trigger an answer.
Yeah.
And the faith one did. Now that I know that, I should have asked more about God. Tell me about your mission.
Yeah.
It was just like adrenaline.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting is after it aired, the people that knew Chad called me and said, that is not the Chad we know. Chad used to always wear khaki pants and collared shirts.
Like he wears in court.
Right.
Yeah.
They'd never seen him in shorts. He had lost weight. He was tan. He had more hair. They're like, we don't know that guy. And then people that knew Lori, who had defended her up to that point, were calling me saying, okay, this is weird.
Yeah.
Anything that you want to add? Any final message you have for people watching?
Yeah. My friend Tom Evans is writing a book.
Right. Yeah. That was another question. What do you think about Tom writing the book?
Tom is a really good man, and he's doing it again from the right place, and he's donating a majority of the proceeds to the Hope House, which is a great, I've read about it. It seems like a great organization. I've heard Tom and Susan talking about it. They seem, his reasons for doing it is to make something positive out of something so negative. And so I know it's on pre-sale right now at tomevansauthor.com. And I would never do it. I could never, there was a lot just to do this. I'm putting myself out there doing this, but I think it's after listening to you and, you going through the questions of what people had, that I had those answers. So I felt obligated to share them and to fill people in and, because nothing's a secret, it's other than deliberations, nothing else to me is really a secret.
Right.
So,
so Tom's book is ready. He's not releasing it until there's a verdict in Chad's case.
Correct.
And then once that verdict comes down, you can get it. So as you mentioned, he's got a website, and he's been coming to Chad's trial nearly every day. I mean, he's there, and people know him. He's become kind of a fixture there. And you're right, very open to talking with everyone, very kind.
He's such a good man.
Right.
And his wife was amazing too. Really good family. So yeah, supporting him to me is also important. And he's put a lot of hard work in this, and I support him in doing that.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? To think you were nervous. You did great.
I text Tom before. I'm like, he's on his way.
You did great. Thank you so much, Laura, for chatting.
I do think she did great. I think she crushed. I think we learned a lot. I appreciate Nate Eaton always just crushing it out there, just bringing so much information in this case, a local feel, and being able to do stuff like this, being on site. Really wild what he's been able to do with all of these cases. So let me know what you guys thought. Let me know what your comments are, what your questions are. I'm going to read through them. Make sure you guys hit the like button. I don't think I said that yet. And subscribe to our page if you haven't already. Love to get more info. Love to get everybody's takes on the situation and, you know, how they're feeling about it from their perspective. It's really cool when we all watch the same things, but we can see it a little bit differently. And I learned so much from everybody's different takes. So thanks for joining me. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.